You can sit like a fly on the wall. Take part in this heavenly fall. That's none of your business.
Hello, it's Justin Coletti, and welcome back for some more MixCon. Today we have a masterclass with a truly amazing mixer, one Andrew Scheps. He is well known for his work with artists like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele, Metallica. He's done some beautiful work in recent years with the artist Hozier, and there's just so many more. He is a prolific mixer and also a prolific voice when it comes to talking about mixing and really getting to the heart of what matters. And today we're going to dive deep with him into a mix for an artist called Low Roar, an artist that's very close to his heart, that he's very deeply and personally involved with. I can't wait to have Andrew on this channel. I can't wait for you to hear and see his masterclass for yourself. All these MixCon masterclasses are free to the public thanks to our sponsors, and the sponsor on this one, as always, is a super natural fit. It is my favorite headphone maker and Andrew's. It is Odyssey. Andrew Scheps is known for making significant mixing choices in headphones throughout much of his career, and in recent years he has switched from the headphones he grew up using to Odyssey headphones. This has been a big change for him, and I think an extremely welcome one. In my opinion, they are making the best headphones out there for mixing and mastering. I'm not saying that because they're a sponsor. They're a sponsor because I want to be able to say that. They are absolutely great, and I use them in my own work, and Andrew uses them again and again in his own work. In fact, from what I understand, Andrew begins, especially all of his immersive mixes, on headphones, making really important decisions on them before scaling up to multi-speaker surround sound systems. He is a master at mixing not only in stereo formats, but also surround, and he'll tell us about both of those applications. I think, especially in recent years, Andrew Scheps has become one of the best mixers in getting truly beautiful ambience and truly immersive experiences that translate to two channels as well as multiple channels that us stereo listeners can appreciate and enjoy just as much as people on surround systems. Not only do we have this masterclass going on for you, but right after this premiere concludes, we'll be doing a live Q&A and interview with Andrew Scheps, where we will be taking your questions for Andrew. So if you're here for the live premiere, type them into the chat box here on the screen. We'll be saving the best questions to ask him in real time, right as soon as the premiere of this masterclass is over. Also, one last quick note, we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear in the MixCon mega giveaway. Go and check that out over at mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can be sure to RSVP for other upcoming masterclasses and workshops, as well as entering into that giveaway where there are multiple chances to win. All right, big thanks to Andrew Scheps for doing this masterclass. Big thanks to Odyssey for helping make it free to the public. Big thanks to the artist Low Roar for allowing us to dive under the hood of some of their tracks here. Really excited to get right into this one. Andrew, take it away.
Hello, I'm Andrew Scheps, and we're here at Rack Studios in London. Hold up the mug for you. I'm having a decaf coffee. And we are here to do a presentation of some stuff that I have worked on. And what I've chosen is a song called None of Your Business by Low Roar. And we're going to be here all day. We're going to be looking at the stereo version of the song. We're going to look at the Atmos version of the song. And we're also going to look at an immersive recording that I did of the strings for this song. So I'll open that up separately, and we'll have the binaural re-render of the Atmos. So basically, if you're listening in headphones, hopefully you'll hear a little bit of the surroundness of that recording. And I do want to thank SonicScoop and also Odyssey for sponsoring the shoot here. Odyssey has been very, very good to me. And I have to make one admission. I forgot to bring my headphones today. I'm not going to be working on headphones, so it's not going to affect what we're doing here, but I did want to show them off. I used the LCD MX4s, and Chris Barron's there has been extraordinary with me. It took me 2 years to figure out which model of the Odyssey headphones I was going to use. Every trade show, I just sat in front of their booth and swapped headphones back and forth. And well, we might as well just talk about this now. I mean, I've used headphones extensively in my stereo mixing for years. I started off doing it because I was traveling and I wanted to be able to work while I was gone without compromising things. And that worked out really well. And in fact, the second Low Roar record, the first set of mixes were all done on headphones. And I assumed when I got home and put it back on speakers that I'd have to rework everything. And it was actually close. And that was kind of the revelation that I could do that. But now that I do a lot of Atmos music mixing as well, not only for me doing the mix, but for the rest of the world listening to the mix, the headphones are crucial because most people will consume Atmos mixes on headphones. And you have a couple different ways of doing it depending on which music service you're listening on. But headphones is what people hear. Most people won't be lucky enough to get in front of speakers. So I spend a huge amount of time in headphones on my Odyssey LCD MX4s. And it's a little bit of a plug because they're awesome. Right. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the stereo session, and I'm not going to rip it apart. This won't be a deconstructing the mix kind of thing, but there are a few very specific things I want to talk about. Then one of the things I want to talk about is the string recording for this song. So we're going to go into some technical detail on that. I'll open up the session I actually recorded in, and then we're going to look at the Atmos mix of this song. So we'll get through all of the different variations that this song has had and a little bit of the construction and how it worked out. I'm going to play the song for you really quickly so you can see what's going on because I'll scroll around while I'm playing. At the top, we've got basses. There's no drums. There are no percussive elements on this song. So bass is in blue. Then there are a lot of keyboards. So we've got pianos in red. And this piano here, which we're definitely going to talk about in a bit, is the main recording. And that was Ryan singing and playing piano, and that's the core of the song, and everything else was built on top of that. Some piano overdubs. We've got some woodwinds, clarinets and saxes, some subharmonic stuff here, lots of little weird keyboard things that you'll hear floating in and out. This is the string recording. Looks like a lot of tracks. I'll explain that afterwards. Lead vocals and some background vocals, and you can see there's some vocal effect stuff. So I am going to hit play, and by the way, you're hearing stereo for right now because this is the stereo mix. Later on, we will have the binaural stream, which is a spatialized version of the speaker mix for the Atmos, but made to listen in headphones. So here we go with the stereo mix.
Lost in a garden of dreams. That's none of your business. It's none of your business. It's none of your business.
I love this song. Let's talk about the piano for a second. So Ryan recorded most of the record at the piano. This song is very rubato. It's just how he felt it at the moment. But one thing I want to mention first is this little piano motif at the end. So this is something Ryan and I talked about, I think from about the third album onward, is having a motif that would sort of pay off at the end of the record. So most of this record is in the same key to accommodate this happening. That piano motif is at the end of about half of the songs on the record. And then the last song on the record, that is the piano part from that song. So what it does, and we did this on the second album as well, is it builds this sense of familiarity. It's almost like the last song on the record is the chorus of a song because you've heard it come and go. So all of the other songs are the verses, and then you get the payoff of the chorus. Let's also talk about the recording of the piano. So as I said, Ryan recorded this sitting at the piano. So here are the original piano tracks in the first verse. Solo those up for you.
Staring at me through the screen. Wondering what I've seen.
So beautiful, but it also means I can't really do anything to the piano, and I can't really do anything to the voice, because if I treat the piano, it treats the voice. If I treat the voice, it treats the piano. And that was not something I wanted to be hemmed into. It was important to me to be able to do stuff to the vocals and to be able to do things to the piano that weren't going to affect them. Especially on this record, the vocal is very loud, and the piano and the vocal are the focal point of every single song. So I needed to be able to deal with them separately. So there is lots of software now that can actually split things apart. So you give it a fully mixed song and you can split the drums out. It's kind of scary how good the software has gotten. But because I'd started doing the Atmos music mixes, I became aware of a program called Spectral Layers from Steinberg that is just awesome. So the timing actually worked out, because what I did is I took the piano and I threw it into Spectral Layers. And here, I'll go back to this and we'll actually look at Spectral Layers for a second. And all I've done is take the piano recording and put it into Spectral Layers. So that's just the two microphones on the piano, though it's a pretty good sounding vocal recording as well. Then what I can do, and I'll just do the sort of automatic version of this. I did some tweaking as well. But if I go to the Unmix Song module, you basically say, I have a recording, it has some instruments in it, and you tell it what instruments there are, and that will fine-tune the model to go looking for stuff. So I'm telling it they're vocals, piano, and then there's always this other track, which is just the stuff it couldn't categorize. And I'm going to say apply. So you can see it's now color-coded, and what we've got over here, these are layers, they're sort of like tracks, is we've got a vocals, a piano, and another. So if I hit play, it's going to sound exactly like it did last time I hit play. But if I solo up the vocal, and if I solo up the other, you hear that that's basically piano. So what I'm going to do is merge that up into the piano. And now that's piano. And that's vocal. It's insane. The first time I did it, I was expecting it to kind of sort of help me out and not to make it this clean. And what's great about it is I did this on the piano tracks, and then I also did it on the vocal track. And there are a couple of songs where I'm using the bleed as reverb on the thing it is bleed for. So I'm actually using the vocal bleed with the vocal to give it some space, but it doesn't mean I can't do stuff to the piano because it would affect the vocal bleed. So this made it possible to do all of the things I wanted to do, especially having the vocal and the piano so present and loud in the mixes. So back in the session, if we switch to my playlists here, this is the clean piano. And there's just no vocal, which is incredible. There's some other piano tracks. This is on a lot of the songs. They're just sort of tinkle tracks, as they're called. So stereo tinkle track, which some people are going to laugh at because they think that's a funny word. And then one more track of piano. And then later on in the song, basically Ryan is just in the piano with his hands and he wears a bunch of rings and you can hear him clacking around. Which in the track, it's really atmospheric, I believe. And this is just the pianos. And I think what you get from this, it's a very natural piano sound as well. They did an amazing job recording the piano. But it gives you a sense of being in the room with something that's going on. You may not even recognize that that's something going on inside the piano. It doesn't really matter, but it's a very natural sound as opposed to a sort of produced album sound. And again, that's a big part of this record is you can listen to all of the amazing little noisy overdubs and all the stuff that happened, but if you listen to it and just concentrate on the piano and the voice, you're in the room with Ryan, he's playing you songs. And I think that's pretty special. And we got some, I mean, like the bass on this is awesome. Who doesn't like this? What more do you need to know? And then this track is called the GM, the grandmother, Moog grandmother, which Mike Lindsay uses a lot. And then it says that the H939, I would imagine it's the H949 because Mike is kind of the king of processing stuff through tape delays and harmonizers. So it's the pulsing sort of filter you get. And it becomes quite pronounced here. Which just adds to this sense of tension that's going on with all of the noisier keyboards. There are also these subharmonics, which aren't sub. So sort of analog-y, glitchy, little bit out of tune. Mellotrons. Basically, Ryan really likes Mellotrons. And he just did a bunch of tracks. And that's something we do on a lot of songs where you just find something and then you just keep doing it. And doing it. And instead of it being takes you're going to comp together, it's takes you're going to use together. And each one on its own, you might say, well, that has nothing to do with the song or there are holes in it and things. But the tracks go together to create a single thing, which in this case is a bunch of Mellotrons doing stuff. A little more glitchy stuff. Very cool, sits in the background. And then we've got some other keyboards here. So this is a very prominent feature of the first half of the song. It's one of the few things other than the noise that's in through the verses. So you can hear it.
Staring at me through the screen.
Great, great sound. And then the vocals themselves, starting with the second record, this octave down, slightly glitchy vocal became kind of a personality. And we thought it was just for that record, and then it turns out it's actually really cool. So we've got the main vocal. Now, this is the vocal that is split out of the bleed. So this is the dry vocal when I split the vocal recording as opposed to when I split the piano recording.
Staring at me through the screen.
You can hear just a tiny, tiny bit of the piano in the background, but it was as loud in the vocal mic as the vocal was in the piano mics. And then we've got the low vocal sitting down here. Staring at me through the screen. And then there's just a ghosting reverb track that's down here. It's basically just going through a reverb, nothing special there. It was a way to have some control if we wanted to have one of the lines be drier instead of muting sends, things like that. I'm a big fan of being able to see everything that's happening in a mix instead of having to look at mute automation on a send or on a return, that kind of thing. And then at the end, what do we get here? I forget what this is now. Lost in the garden of dreams. So this vocal arrangement, just having that very small dry one, but it's off to the left a little bit, and it's a little bit of Ryan whispering in your ears. So I'll solo up the vocals in that spot.
Lost in a garden of dreams.
And I'll play it for you in context. And actually, I'll play it from the line before, so you can hear kind of how, when it splits apart and you get Emma's vocal, that it really is telegraphing we're going somewhere here.
Know that you know it's been a race. Lost in a garden of dreams.
So there are more vocals, but in a way, it's a more intimate moment, which is odd, but that's the way it comes across. And then there are a couple of tracks, especially at the beginning, before the vocal starts, this poem, and then just some noises, really. So in a way, this is like the extra tracks of piano, where it's almost just a sound effecty ghost of a vocal that's underneath. I'm not even sure how well you hear this, but this would be a spot where you might. You can just hear the very tail of this. And doesn't matter that it's out of tune. It doesn't matter that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what's going on in the song. It's just a great little addition to go with all of the keyboard weirdness. But again, all of this happens as a bed that's below the main piano and the vocal. So really quickly with the strings, I'll show you this, but then I'm going to open up the session we actually recorded the strings into, so we can be soloing up some stuff, and we'll switch to binaural at that point, so you can hear a little bit of what happens when you're having the more spatial playback of this recording. So the recording is 11 microphones, so it's left, center, right, then 2 to the sides, 2 to the rear, and then there are 4 microphones pointing straight up that are in the corners of this square. So it's a meter squared with the left, right, and rear left, right in the corners, and the top left, right and rear top left right right next to them. So the height microphones, which are recording the ceiling, aren't any higher. So this recording of the strings was done with the Atmos version of the song in mind, whereas the rest of the song, everything was done for stereo. But I knew I was going to use the strings in the stereo mix. And when I recorded them, I assumed that I would use the front microphones. I would use the left-right microphones. And it's a recording of a string quartet. I should back up a little bit. In a Baptist church in Paris, which I don't think there are very many of those. It's a wooden church, not a stone church, but a beautiful sounding church with a very long natural decay. And the church has been converted into an art space. So there's a small stage at the front, which we didn't use. The quartet is on the floor in front of the stage. And the microphones are back about, I'm going to switch to feet because I'm American, about 10 feet back, maybe 12 feet back. And the front left and right microphones are angled so that they're facing just outside of the quartet. Then you've got the side mics pointed straight to the side. The rear mics aren't pointed straight back. They're angled out as well, a little bit to the sides, just because they felt a little bit too ambient when they were pointed straight back. And then the height microphones were pointed straight up. So I'm capturing the entire acoustic space, but from the perspective of somebody who is standing in the middle of this square of microphones. And there are lots of different ways you can do an immersive recording. And for me, the more I've done, the more I like capturing the space from a listener's perspective, rather than just having lots of extra microphones and then putting them around the room. There's something about how coherent this recording is. And when I open up the string recording session, hopefully you'll hear it even just in headphones. But the way this is set up is you have the front, left, center, and right. Then you have the side left, side right, rear left, rear right, and then you've got this quad set of height microphones. So as I said before, I thought that on the stereo mix, I would just use the front, left, and right microphones because that's what made sense to me. Those would be more direct, and that's what would work. And then in the Atmos mix, I would use all the microphones, and that would be fantastic. As it turns out, I was completely wrong. And I've ended up mixing and matching the microphones, and it just completely changes what you hear and how you're hearing it. So at the beginning of the string arrangement, it's harmonics. So I'll play you this part of the song.
That's none of your business. Do you know if you feel anymore?
So you can hear very ethereal, far away. And that's what it needed to be. So I'll turn on the other microphones and I can just mute and solo. And we'll do more of this when I actually bring up the session. So if I solo the height microphones, then you'll hear what I'm actually using in the mix. Now, we'll just compare that to the front, left, center, right. It's going to be louder as well, but it still sounds good, but it's very dry. And I think it also kind of points out the intonation issues. It's very difficult to be playing harmonics like that and be completely in tune. Also, you hear the rosin on the strings, the bow noise when you're playing harmonics. The scraping of the bow is almost as loud as the harmonics themselves. So I'll play this for you again. And obviously I could add reverb to that, but when you hear just the height microphones. So again, these are microphones that are relatively close to the quartet, but they're super cardioid and they're pointed straight up. So the thought of taking the drier recording, which has an issue in the balance between the sound of the bows and the harmonics themselves, and also the fact that it's too dry and that it points out the harmonics, or use the room that I captured as the actual microphones to use. It took me a minute to actually even think of it, but it was like, okay, great. And then this is the way I can treat these immersive recordings, even in stereo, is to realize that I've captured the acoustic space, but I don't need to have all of the speakers to manipulate the space. I can just use what I would like. And I've also turned up the height microphones 6 dB here, and I've turned up the rear microphones 2.4. So I'm really favoring the more ambient parts of the room. So let me mute those again, and we'll move on to sort of where the full quartet is playing. You see in this section, I'm using the front microphones and the rear microphones and the height microphones. So I'm going for the drier recording of the quartet, and then I'm using the rears and the heights as a sort of reverb for the front microphones. And I'm not using the side mics because they were a little bit too present. So this is the main part of the string arrangement, but it's while the vocals are still in. We hear a bus here. So I also want to point out that this is the raw recording of the microphone. On the way in, these are all Scheps microphones, different Scheps, unfortunately, because that would be kind of cool. But 11 Scheps microphones recorded into a DAD AX Center, which is same people who make the Matrix, if you use the Pro Tools Matrix, but incredibly clean mic pre's. And the AX Center is a single rack space, so I can actually just carry it around. And the mic pre's are set for gain. You get a level using the front microphones because they will be the loudest. And then I just set the gain exactly the same. And the only processing there is I have a high pass filter because there was air conditioning in the church. So there's a high pass at 100 hertz, 12 dB per octave. That's it. There's nothing else happening with the sound of this. There's no added reverb, no EQ, no compression, nothing. And the sound of that, I have a really hard time with reverb. As in a lot of other mixing videos, I say I suck at reverb. And it's because I'm really unhappy with the reverbs that I get. They never sound natural and they never feel right. I don't have synesthesia where I see colors when I hear sounds, but I'll call it an emotional reaction, but it's a sort of a physiological reaction to the way things sound. And when it's right, it's like goosebumps when it's something like a transition, like when this first note hits here with the sub bass. That's the sort of goosebumpy thing I get. And with the reverbs, I'm not unhappy. It doesn't make me sad, but it's the best way to describe it. And then all of a sudden, there's sort of this tension that goes away when it's right. And that's the way this string recording sounds to me. So again, this is a little bit without the side microphones. And then when we get further into the outro, everything is more spacious, and I didn't want the strings to be the focal point all the way through. The arrangement is there. And one of the things when I talked to Jarl, the Norwegian arranger, whose name I just mispronounced, and I'm not even going to try to say his surname, but it's in the credits. Amazing string arranger. And we talked about the fact that the song is so rubato that we didn't want to try and follow the piano. And so that every chord change happened and there would be a different chord being played in the strings. There is this endless series of suspensions, and the string players are almost never changing notes at the same time. And I'll go into that a little bit more in the string recording session. But as the strings sink into the background, rather than turn them down or add reverb, all I did was get rid of the front mics and turn on the side mics, which is a just slightly less present version of the string recording. And contrast that to the earlier part where we're using the front microphones. So you can hear it's a much more present thing, and that is because at that point, when it takes over from the vocal, the strings are sort of the thing, and then you get all the tinkling pianos sort of pick up some speed. And I want it to be more about the growl of the bass and about the keyboard textures, and not to take over, because the song was done without the strings. And I really felt like the strings were the thing that, for me as a producer and sort of being in the band on these records, that's what I wanted to have happen on the song, and no one had a problem with it. But I didn't want it to be about the strings. I wanted the strings to be about the song. So that was the difference in terms of using different microphones at different times. So I think at this point, I'm going to open up the string recording session just to show you technically a little bit more of what's going on. And also, we will switch to the binaural audio stream so that if you're listening in headphones, hopefully you'll get a sense of the actual space and not just a sense of more reverb. All right, we're back after an edit where you didn't even realize we'd gone anywhere. But what I've done now is I've opened up the session I actually recorded the strings into, just as a little intro to the process and also the way I had to do it. And one of the things I wanted to show you is the click track, which is absolutely insane. And the meter is also changing all over the place. So because this was done rubato, there is no click, and there obviously is meter to the song, but basically what happens is he sings a line and then you hang around for a bit. And so to find a click that would work for people to be able to follow sheet music and say, okay, we're at bar this, I had to make something. And I think that it works because we got the string recording, but it was a nightmare to play to. And at one point, the string players were convinced that they were off by a beat. They said, no, we're in the wrong place. There's something wrong with the way the click is. And then, like, no, you're absolutely right. And you can hear at one point that they actually kind of marry up with the piano and do an ascending line. And that's how I knew they were in the right place, because you couldn't even tell for sure looking at the score because someone had transcribed the piano, but it was so rubato that anyway, really difficult. And they did this in 2 takes. And the second take was only for intonation, nothing to do with their feel or anything like that. And I think it was more of a safety. I did cut between the 2 takes. There was also a bus that went by that you could hear. So anyway, the point of this is that we've switched the stream to the binaural stream, as I mentioned. So you can listen to it on speakers. It might be a little bit phasey, but you're not going to get anything out of it. But in headphones, what you should get, if you're lucky, is a sense of space. So you're not going to hear something coming directly from behind you or above you or something like that. But rather than these extra microphones sounding like reverb on the string recording, they will sound as though we are opening up the acoustic space that you're in while you listen to the strings. That's the idea of it. So I'm going to focus on the recording of the second section, because why not? And right here is basically the rough mix of the song that they were playing along to, and then I had the piano and the vocals separate in case they wanted to just play to that for cues, things like that. So I'm not even going to bother with that. We're just going to hear strings. This is with all of the microphones, and again, they are untreated. This is just the 106.8 hertz high-pass filter, very random while I was recording. And the only difference in level is I have the front microphones turned down 3.4 dB. That just sounded a little too present. I wanted more of the room. And then we're in Atmos, so I'm using objects which pan into the Atmos renderer, which you'll see here. And each one of these is just being panned to a speaker. So the front left microphone is panned to the front left, and et cetera, et cetera. If we look at the rear microphones, they're rear, left, and right. And then the top microphones are top, left, right, front, back. So I'm not doing any mixing per se. I'm taking each microphone and playing it out of a speaker. And then that mix is being encoded binaurally to let you hear that on headphones. That's the long version. So here is a little bit of the recording in binaural, and then we'll go back and start taking microphones in and out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play from the same spot, and I'm going to take out sets of microphones. So if you're following along looking at the screen, again, these 4 yellow ones are the height microphones. Then these purple ones are the rear microphones, the lighter purple, or let's call it lilac. It's a dark lilac. Those are the side microphones. And then we have the other bluish purple, that is the left, center, right microphones. So the left, center, rights, and at this point you will have seen a diagram because we've talked about it, but the front, left, center, right are basically meant to be what is known as a deca tree. And it's a very traditional recording technique. It's 3 microphones, left, center, right. They're spread out much more than my microphones were spread, especially when recording an orchestra. But the idea is there's a little bit of an arc. So the left and the right microphones are the same distance from whatever it is you're recording. And the center microphone is a little bit forward. So you get this kind of arc. You could have the center microphone back, but the traditional technique is to have it a little bit forward. And then we start adding the side, the rear, and the height microphones. So again, I'm going to hit play. I'm going to take out the height microphones. Then I'm going to take out the rears. Then the sides will just be left with the fronts. Then I'm going to play it again without talking so you can actually just hear this back to back. And I'm going to start putting the microphones in again. And then I'm going to say what it is that I hear as the microphones go back in. So here we go. even in the binaural and headphones, what I hear is what I was talking about before, where when you add the sides and the rears, the recording becomes more like what you would want. It has some more reverb on it. Though I do feel that just the front microphones, if it's really just a string quartet recording, are beautiful. But you get more sense of space. It feels more natural to me. But when you turn on the height microphones, that sense of being in the room happens to the point where it somehow makes me relax. I don't have a better way to describe it, but I absolutely love that. I'm just going to play it again. I'll take the height microphones out and then put them back in. You may not respond to it the same way I do, but I like doing it, and I'm in charge. So I'm going to hit play and do that. Yay! So now I'm going to open up the Atmos session. All right, so this is the Atmos mix of the exact same song. Well, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time in here, but I will play you the whole thing so you can hear the binaural version of it. And then maybe you can skip back and forth to when I played it at the beginning of the video and hear what you hear as the difference between the stereo and the binaural. There are very few differences in terms of balance and things like that. I did take a few liberties because I could, because I'm not in charge of the project, but I am one of the people most involved in the project, and I didn't have to worry too much about it being exactly the same. But on this song in particular, I don't think I made any big changes to balance or panning or anything like that. So the panning would be more about front to back and distance within the binaural settings. And then also just the way I use the strings, which I'll talk about in a second. But it might be interesting for you to switch back and forth from the stereo to the binaural version and just see what you hear. So the strings are here as mixed. And in the stereo version, you may remember, I'll make these a little bigger, that I only used the height microphones. So I just bounced it as a 714. So I had it, or a 704. And that's just the height microphones. Then I didn't use the version where I turned off the sides and then turned off the fronts. Because it was spread out through all of the speakers, I actually used all 11 microphones for the two stretches of strings that are in the second half of the song. But one thing I did do, I talked about the idea that the piano and the vocal are the record. You could take out everything else on every single song, and you would have a record. The songs are played on the piano and sung by Ryan while he's playing piano. A couple of songs, the programming is a big part, but generally that's the way the album is. And I wanted the Atmos versions of these songs to reflect that. So I don't want to go too much into what Atmos mixing is, but basically you just have lots of speakers in a circle around you and some above you. And what I wanted to do was use the left and right speakers for the piano and the voice. And then everything else could be moved around the room and the arrangement could envelop you and be very immersive, which is the word they use to describe mixing in Atmos or Sony 360 or any of the other formats that have multiple speakers. But for me, it really is a matter of being immersed in the mix. And it's how do you surround the listener with the song without ruining the song? And it's very easy to ruin the song. With these songs, because the vocal and the piano are the core of the song, it actually gave me a lot of freedom to move things around. So, for instance, the woodwinds are very often split to the back because they're really interesting on their own, but having them by themselves in the back doesn't take away from you listening to the song, but it gives them their own space to be sort of their own character as opposed to an overdub. So what I did with the strings is I'm using this plugin called Audio Matrix from Sound Particles, who makes some amazing immersive plugins. It's basically a patch bay, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the strings out of the left and right speakers. So the left, center, and right are all going to some version of the center speaker and then the wide speakers, which are just outside the left and right. So I don't have any strings in the left and the right. They're further outside and then in the center, and that leaves those speakers alone for the voice and the piano. And because the voice is a mono thing, you get a phantom center just like you do listening to the stereo mix, but that's very different to having something coming out of the center speaker. So the vocal is not in the center speaker, but the strings are, and that gives this sort of 5-channel wall of strings, piano and vocal, strings, piano and vocal, strings, with the vocal sounding like it's coming from the center. And it's a very immersive way to hear that, and then everything else is dotted around the room. So the other thing about my Atmos mixes, especially if I've done the stereo mix, is I do not work from the multi-track. I find it to be precarious, is a good word to use. You've got all of the individual elements that you have balanced and sent to effects and done all of the things you have done to make it work in stereo. Almost always the stereo mix is finished and then you do the Atmos mix. And that is a workflow I've gotten used to because that's the way it usually works when you're mixing for a label and for an artist, is that the stereo version gets done. And even if they know they need the Atmos version, nobody's thinking about it until 2 days before you need to deliver. And they say, oh, we need the Atmos version. And then you go ahead and make it. So what I do is I create basically a new multi-track from the stereo mix. I solo every single element separately, bounce it through the mix bus. What that gives me is a folder full of wave files that if I put them all at 0 and hit play, it is the stereo mix. You don't need anything specific to do with Pro Tools. You don't need to do any balancing. You don't need to do panning. And most importantly, you don't have to do any signal processing. You don't need any plugins. You just have a folder full of files that is the stereo mix. Then from there, I have my source material to make the Atmos mix. Now, having everything stereo, even if it's mono, can be an issue, and I will split a stereo track just to a mono track. But generally, I'm not messing with the left-right panning because so many people are going to listen in headphones that I want the left-right kind of sound stage to be reflected in the Atmos mix in the same way it is in the stereo mix, because the arrangement is built to work that way. And if you start changing that, especially in headphones, things can become very unbalanced and weighted towards one side in a part of the song that would be very distracting. So the left-right balance generally survives the Atmos mix. Every once in a while, things are being spun around in circles, which is really fun. But I'm fine using the stereo tracks. So you might remember we had those 2 basses that I showed you before. Well, they are on 2 stereo tracks instead of 2 mono tracks. The strings are brought in 704 because that's the way they were recorded. And then this is everything as it was done in the stereo mix, but bounced. And you can see everybody's stereo, but it's all the same tracks. We had all the different mellotrons separately. Then we have exactly the same number of vocals, but they are all stereo now. And there's one thing which I'm assuming I'm panning one of these guys around. Oh, yeah. Okay, so one of these, just the main sort of blippy synth that we soloed up in the stereo mix. I'm going to bring up the window for the Atmos renderer, and what you'll see is that generally, if you look at my Atmos mixes, things look as though they're static. I'm not going to go into that. I've done videos about my mix template and my theory on how I mix to Atmos, and I don't want to spend a lot of time going into technical details about that. But when I want to move stuff around, I will generally use separate objects to move it around the room, and that's what's going on with this blippy synth. Is you'll see there's a pattern. It kind of jumps around a little bit, but it's very slowly moving front to back, and it'll move up and down as it goes, I believe. Yeah, there it goes, and it goes up. And this is using the Dolby Music Panner, which can run in time. But you saw the tempo map for the song. It's a disaster. The last thing I would want is for something to be happening in time with that tempo map. So this is sort of a random slow movement that has nothing to do with the tempo of the song, and it just keeps that one sound being a point of interest, because for me, it's a really important element of the song, but you don't want to make it louder because then it will just overbalance. So by having it move a little bit, it makes it stick out. Great things about mixing in Atmos that you can't really do in stereo. So I'm going to play the Atmos mix now, and then you can compare it to the mix that we heard earlier in stereo.
Staring at me through the screen, wondering what I've seen. You can sit like a fly on the wall. Take part in this heavenly fall. That's none of your business. Do you know if you feel anymore? Cut off from your own front door. Well, the food will be perfectly placed, and all that you know's been erased. Lost in a garden of dreams. That's none of your business. It's none of your business. It's none of your business.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that masterclass as much as I did. Andrew is obviously a phenomenal mixer. I think there were some beautiful sounds in this one. And big shout out and thanks to the artist Low Roar, as well as to Odyssey, making some of my favorite headphones for mixing and mastering applications today. And obviously, Andrew's favorite headphones for those applications as well. I really can't recommend them enough. Remember, we have a live Q&A coming up with Andrew right after this, so I want to see you over there asking your questions of him in real time. Also, go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can RSVP for upcoming masterclasses and workshops, as well as enter for your chance to win more than $10,000 worth of free pro audio gear. There are multiple chances to win that one, so good luck. And I hope to see you in the live Q&A coming up right after this. See you there.